In June of 1990, less than 5 months after his release from 27 years in prison, Nelson Mandela arrived in the United States for a whirlwind tour that included a presidential visit, a concert by the biggest pop stars of the day, and a show of gratitude by millions of people inspired by his fight against apartheid. Over 12 days, he kept a grueling schedule, visiting 8 cities: Miami, Boston, Washington, Atlanta, Detroit, Los Angeles, Oakland, and his first stop, New York City. Back in 1990, Tom Brokaw, anchor of NBC's Nightly News, reported on the historic visit.
The man who spent 27 years in prison was given a hero's welcome. Governor Mario Cuomo calling him a symbol of the indestructibility of the human spirit. The 71-year-old Mandela seemed tired, not quite ready for it all. Jesse Jackson gave him a hand with his tie. Mandela urged the United States to maintain its tough policy against South Africa as blacks there struggle for equality.
And the only way in which we can work together on this difficult road is for you to ensure that sanctions are applied.
Mandela and his wife Winnie stopped by a Brooklyn high school. They were greeted by 10,000 people. Then New York City honored Mandela as no other city can. A ticker tape parade up Broadway. Mandela said he knew he had friends in New York, but never dreamed he was so loved. The key to the city from Mayor David Dinkins. Mandela then talked of unlocking the shackles of apartheid.
We want our new South Africa to be a country which vanishes forever. Racism in all its forms. South Africa shall be free. The struggle continues.
Tonight, the issues and the controversy. 1,000 people have gathered at the City College of New York for a town meeting with Nelson Mandela.
There's Mr. Mandela, Mr. Nelson Mandela, a free man taking his first steps into a new South Africa.
Nelson Mandela, Welfare Committee, may I help you?
You got to get 40 young men and women just for the placards. You know, everybody's excited now by Mandela, so they'll do it.
You're here to help? Are you reporting to work? Okay, I see.
The tickets have been received, but she needs to send someone down to the Mandela reception office for them.
And you're on your way.
Welcome Mandela to the Bronx. We need to welcome Mandela to the Bronx. Hi there, brother. You coming out Thursday? Welcome Mandela. What do you know about Mandela?
Oh, he was put in jail in South Africa because he believed in freedom.
Now is the time to intensify the struggle on all fronts.
To spend 27 years at the prime of your life is a tragedy. And I regret, those years that I have wasted in prison.
Tell me, how are we doing on Eddie Murphy and on Robert De Niro and on Robin Williams and the rest?
The opening act is going to be the Amico Renegades, which is a steel band. Then Tracy Chapman comes on with her band. We're flying her in. And then Mr. Mandela does his speech.
Together, we must pledge to continue our united efforts for the abolition of the apartheid system.
You can see the increase in the confetti and in the ticker tape coming out of the windows, and here is Nelson Mandela.
Apartheid is doomed. South Africa shall be free.
And now, Thursday, June 21st, Nelson Mandela comes to Harlem. 7 years ago, while he was still in prison in South Africa, Mandela was awarded an honorary doctorate in absentia at this university. Today, he comes to the City College of New York in person to participate in a town meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, Nelson Mandela. Please take it. That's all we have.
Nelson Mandela's visit began in New York with a ticker-tape parade and a hero's welcome at Yankee Stadium.
I am a Yankee!
Lumumba Bandele, then 18 years old, remembers that hot summer day.
There were people literally hanging from the gates.
He was there when Mandela visited Brooklyn, where racial tensions were high.
He electrified that space. And, I still run into people to this day who talk about how that experience transformed them.
In Boston,
people were excited that
I was reporting at Madison Park High School when Mandela arrived.
Mr. Nelson Mandela.
Inside the school, pure excitement.
You have filled our hearts.
Celestino de Peña was a student there.
23 years later, I still remember that day as if it were yesterday. You heard about this guy, rich of history, and then suddenly you know that he's coming to visit your high school. It was a very surreal moment.
In Detroit, tens of thousands flocked to Tiger Stadium. Owen Bieber was in the Motor City.
I met him for the first time, and I got to tell you, we embraced.
It was a whirlwind trip. 8 cities, 12 days. Stops in Miami, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., and Atlanta.
To be so young and to meet a leader as great as Mandela, it was a really big moment.
Yenu Wadaja was just 10 years old at the time, on the tarmac in Atlanta.
I just remember looking in his face, and even as young as I was, remember thinking just what a kindness there was about him in his eyes, thinking how amazing it was for somebody who had been through so much to not have a hardened heart.
Nelson Mandela, a man who survived prison to become president, inspiring countless people, changing how so many view the world and themselves.
Mandela when he arrived in the U.S. June 1990. At the time, the FBI considered Mandela's African National Congress a terrorist group. Jason Leopold is an investigative reporter and contributor, a digital contributor for Al Jazeera America, who broke this story, and he joins us tonight from Los Angeles. Jason, welcome.
Thank you, John. Great to be with you.
Why was the FBI concerned about Nelson Mandela?
Well, it's fascinating. In these files that Al Jazeera obtained from Ryan Shapiro, who filed a FOIA lawsuit against the FBI, the FBI, I mean, what the files show is that there was great concern, enormous concern, that Nelson Mandela was going to be assassinated. So they were trying to find out, one, what Nelson Mandela was up to, what he was doing, who he was speaking with, what his politics were. And a month before he arrived in the U.S., the FBI had cultivated a confidential informant whose name is redacted in these documents to basically provide the Bureau with everything about Mandela's movements. It's important to note that what's very interesting about that is that the FBI did not have the lead on Nelson Mandela's security when he came to the U.S. It was actually the Department of State. So it raises some questions as to why the FBI felt it needed a confidential informant either close to or within Mandela's circle to find out what he was up to.
And do we get any sense of the identity of that informant?
We don't, but this informant certainly knew some intimate details about what Nelson Mandela had planned when he was going to visit the U.S. The informant noted that Louis Farrakhan had raised questions about whether he could meet with Nelson Mandela, that an event in Atlanta was planned by Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther King's widow. So the informant certainly knew quite a bit of detail about Nelson Mandela's movement. And again, this was just 4 months after Mandela was released from 27 years in prison.
Jason, what surprised you the most about these documents?
Well, there's a couple of things. Certainly the fact that the FBI did not really seem to know enough or have enough knowledge about the African National Congress, which is sort of ironic when you look at some of the old news reports that have suggested that the CIA played a role in Mandela's capture and imprisonment. What really stood out for me, though, was the level of hatred, vitriol, and the number of death threats that were directed at Nelson Mandela. I mean, there are some chilling documents in these files, handwritten letters that individuals sent to newspapers, and even phone calls made to various police agencies, just threatening Nelson Mandela's life. And the State Department did note in a threat assessment that the terrorist or the threat against Mandela was very high. And about 10 years later, in 2000, they said the primary threat against Nelson Mandela emanates from right-wing extremist groups.
It's a fascinating story, and you can find it on AlJazeera.com. Jason Leopold. Jason, thank you.
Thank you, John.